Today we'll be going over the concept of complementary angles. Complementary angles are two angles that add to equal 90 degrees. You'll see this used a lot with rectangles and squares as they have 90-degree angles in each one of their corners. And they're diagonals that cut the angle in some form. But starting with the basics, looking at example number 1, it asked us to find the measure of the missing angle below. We are going to assume that this corner was a 90-degree angle. So we know that the two parts, our first part and our second part, are going to add up to equal 90 degrees. So now that I labeled them, I can write a basic equation showing that angle 1 plus angle 2, the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 2 add up to equal 90. Now these are just a placeholder variables so that we can plug in the actual values. We labeled the 48 degrees for number 1 plus our x value for number 2, and this will equal 90. This gives us an opportunity to find out what the value of x is, which will tell us what the value of 2 is. Simple step here, we are going to subtract 48 from both sides. Which would leave us with 42. So x equals 42. So now, depending on what the question is asking, you can either say x equals 42 if we're solving for x, or the fact that it asks for the missing angle exactly. So we can say that the measure of angle 2, which is the same as x, will be 42. They can get a little bit more difficult if we have variables in both angles. We still start off the same way. We want to make sure we know which angle is which. We can start off with the same equation saying that the measure of both angles add up to equal 90. Yet again, we're assuming that this is a 90-degree angle. We plug in our information, measure of angle 1 being 6x, and the measure of angle 2 being x plus 6. And this all still equals 90. This time I have an extra step of combining like terms, which will give me 7x. Still have the plus 6, and it still equals 90. We subtract 6 from both sides. I leave the space so that you can see exactly where the change is happening. And then our last step, we divide 84 by the 7, which will give us a x value of 12. Now, this doesn't answer our question yet. We only found the value of x, and we need to find the values of the angles. So let me scoot over. So in this case, measure of angle 1 equals, now instead of just writing 6x like we did earlier, we're going to do 6 parentheses the value of x, 12. So now we know that it equals 72. We can do the same for measure of angle 2. In this case, it was x plus 6, so this is going to be 12 plus 6, which then gives us 18. So these would be our two answers. We found the measure of both angles. Sometimes you'll get in a word problem. This is a matter of setting up the word problem correctly based off of what it said. It says that two angles are complementary, so we know that they equal 90. It says that one angle, so we can say angle 1, is, which means equals. Let's write that a little bit better. So we know this one is means equals. 12 more than means that we are going to be adding 12 to some value. And it says twice the other. Twice meaning 2 times, and our other angle being angle 2. Now it wants us to find the measure of each angle. So, using the same formula we had earlier, we would have measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2. That would equal 90 degrees. We know that it is complementary. Now, based off of our little setup over here, we can actually replace the angle 1 with all the information over here. So we, instead of measure of angle 1, I can write 2. Let's talk about the measure of angle 2 plus 12. That is our new measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 90. Now in this case, we are just using the name, the measure of angle 2, as the variable. So we're going to treat it that way. In this case, we can combine like terms. So now we have 3 of our measure of angle 2 plus 12 still equals 90. Now we have 2 steps. We need to subtract the 12 and then divide by the 3. Subtracting 12. Trying to keep our equal signs lined up gives us 78 on the other side. And then our last step, dividing both sides by the 3, gives us 26. So that gives us one of the angles. Now we can go back to the original and plug in our known value. Measure of angle 1 plus, instead of measure of angle 2, we now know that it's 26. And this will equal 90 degrees. So now I can subtract 26 from both sides. And I found my last angle. So in this process, you really need to know how to break down a word problem correctly in order to set up your equation to have one variable. In this case, our variable being the measure of angle 2. Now, our last example that I've already filled out, it gives us a rectangle, which then we need to know the rules of a rectangle. That being that every corner is 90 degrees, which means anytime that you divide the angle in any way, those angles add up to equal 90, which is what we have at the top.